listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio.
So hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Changing Reality. Welcome one, welcome all. For all of our returning viewers, we love you all entirely and appreciate the time you take out listening to us here at Changing Reality on WQHS Radio. And for all of our new viewers, first of all, where have you been all this time? Don't you know that this is the place to be? And as always, we appreciate you as well joining us in to listen to the stories that will hopefully change your lives. So Changing Reality is a show that is something personally I find a lot of value in. It is a show that features phenomenal people from all walks of life who are in essence changing their own reality. I'm interviewing with these individuals from social change makers, entrepreneurs, industry leaders, to even artists, musicians, and inspiring individuals from all across the world. We have the opportunity to get a glimpse into not just various industries and experiences, but various paths that we ourselves can take as we chart the course of our own futures. And hopefully by hearing these stories, we're able to shorten our own learning curves and figure out what are the spaces that we want to operate in and what are the changes we want to make in the world around us. So join us here, listen to the inspiring stories, and see what you can do to take that back to your own lives as well. So my name is Harsha, and I am your host here at Changing Reality. I'm someone who truly believes in the power of stories. It's been fundamental to my journey, and I'm glad to be the one to share it all with you. I am a junior here at the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Pennsylvania. But beyond that, I also am president of the Wharton Undergraduate Entrepreneurship Club, as well as the executive director of the Next Gen Entrepreneurship Network, an inter-Ivy association of all of the top leading entrepreneurship clubs from across the Ivies and a few others as well from top universities across the East Coast. But personally, I've been an entrepreneur myself. I actually co-founded and served as CEO of the social enterprise Ascendance, a social enterprise that I founded 9 years ago now in Malaysia, which is where I'm from, that today works with over 50,000 students across 26 countries to build experiential learning opportunities for everyday students to discover what they love, go out there and experience a little bit, build those skills up, and eventually even start their own career while they're still in school. And to date, we've helped countless number of Gen Zs be able to launch their own social enterprises, their own careers for students as young as 8 to 25 years old. And part of the reason we've been able to do that has been stories. It's been kind individuals who've taken time out of their schedules to share with us what worked for them, what didn't, and what can we all be doing a little bit differently. So just like that, I hope that this show is the same platform for all of you here today. And if there are any specific experiences that you want to uncover, if there are any questions you're having in your life, please do reach out, because we'd be more than happy to find people and find the stories that best speak to your journey and can address the burning questions that you're going through right now. So speaking of on to our episode for today. Our speaker today is truly a trailblazer in the world of marketing and data, with someone who has an innate talent for understanding what makes consumers respond and brands succeed. He has a brilliant career that reflects in over 27 years of digital and integrated marketing experiences, and had experienced the data analytics world throughout his career, and has had 18 years of experience in that alone as well. But most fascinatingly, he actually began his entrepreneurial journey as a college sophomore at the University of Pennsylvania itself. And he not only founded and grew, but actually sold an award-winning digital marketing agency that, again, started from his dorm room, but went on to, be ranked as the 30th or as number 30 on Philadelphia's 100 list of fastest growing privately held companies in 2008. He led his startup, Singularity, to over 140 different awards between 2006 and 2010, and eventually sold the company in July 2009. So you would think that that is enough, but apparently that was only the beginning of his journey. He later went and co-founded the first company to combine viral marketing and promotions, building in an opt-in database of over 6.5 million consumers in a 6-month period, selling his second startup to About.com within a year of its launch. So building, managing, and executing brilliant marketing campaigns, brilliant opportunities for consumers has been the name of the game for him. But he also previously led subscriber growth for AMC Networks and has had several leadership roles in analytics, data science, and data products at Discovery and Scripps Networks. Today, he takes his talents in analytics and data insight innovations to his new startup, Glimmer, a data insights and advisory training service that he co-founded. So without further ado, let's welcome our phenomenal speaker onto our virtual stage so that hopefully we can get a little bit of that insight, or at least get some data on where we're going in our lives. So with that, let's welcome Jeff. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Harsha. Thank you again for having me here. It's a thrill to be here. Anything Penn related just warms my heart.
Well, that is extremely upsetting as a student. We would never want to hear. We would have hated you as a student here. Like, actually, we'd always be like, oh my God, that guy is like doing so much better than us. So like, I'm glad you're alumni. I'm glad I wasn't like student when you were a student, and I can have this conversation and feel inspired instead of like the envy that I'm sure your classmates had.
Can I tell you something though? When I was a student, I didn't feel that way. I looked around. Penn and Wharton just attracts such amazing people that I looked around and saw them and thought, well, what am I doing? Like, look at the amazing things they're doing. And everybody kind of feels that way when you're in it. You always feel like, well, this could be so much bigger. This could be so much better, especially in that kind of environment, surrounded by so much talent. So for anybody watching, nobody should be feeling that way. You should just realize you're probably doing amazing things right now and you don't even realize it, and just draw that inspiration from this pool of talent around you.
You know, I'll be the first on behalf of our audience to appreciate your kindness. But having said that, you nailed the hit. Like, you nailed it. That's exactly what I think Penn students feel all the time. There's always kind of this wave of insecurity. I joke that everyone here thinks we're here by mistake. Like, just like everyone looks around and goes like, oh no, like how did I get in among all these people? So I really appreciate, you bringing attention to that just as we start off. And out of curiosity, why did you choose Penn? How did you end up in Penn in the first place? Going out of high school, figuring out what you want to do in the world. Did you have a grand plan? Like, you seem really good with the data. So did you know all of this was going to happen? Or were you, at one point at least, as lost and confused as the rest of us?
First off, digital data wasn't even a word when I was applying to Penn. Like, that wasn't even around. Nobody was talking about analytics, any of those things. The internet didn't even really become a thing for the outside world until I was at Penn. But I have always had a kind of an analytical way of thinking about things. So if I hadn't gone to Penn, if I hadn't gone to Wharton, I was probably going to major in the sciences somewhere. That analytical thought process, trying to break things down, understand the way the world around me works. But I also always had that entrepreneurial bug when I was a kid. I was always trying to start little businesses, selling this or that. And when I found out that Penn had the #1 undergraduate business school in the world, that was what drew my attention. And I said, okay, if I'm going over there, I'll do biology. But if I could go here, I would do business. And that's what drew me in. And so that's what attracted me. And then I got there and it was paradise.
Okay. I cannot imagine, with all the things you did, the biology lens, was there some, do you have a secret engineering talent? Like it's, again, don't upset me here. But like, I definitely think, that sentiment of, being around people who are equally entrepreneurial, equally have kind of the business sense, and being in a space that kind of encourages that to develop is something that I feel a lot of Penn students, again, up until today, that's the reason they apply. I know at least a handful of freshmen who came in, last year, who said, I'm here because, again, I want to do something entrepreneurship. I've always had that kind of in my blood, or kind of, in every element of, high school or middle school. And I want to see what that looks like in this real world, tangible place that can foster that. But not everyone goes on to be an entrepreneur. Not everyone does that, again, while they're in Penn as well. So tell us a little bit about what sparked the initial idea of Singularity, and how did you get that started while you were a student yourself?
It sparked out of a passion for digital design. That was not what I was studying. That was just what I was staying up till 2 a.m. in my dorm room doing. And by virtue of some of the connections I made at Penn, through my campus job, my boss there introducing me to somebody else in the Penn community who was starting a multimedia company, who was looking for help on her team. That led to another introduction to somebody else who came to me and said, hey, the agency I'm working for, we need some freelance help. Are you interested? And in this light bulb went on of, wait a second, I can do this thing that I love doing, that I'm staying up late nights doing, and somebody's going to pay me, and they're going to pay me well. And that was what sparked it. And then once I started it, then really I was embedded in this community at Penn where there was a lot of need. This was the early days. This was 1995. In 1996, you kind of started to have websites become an actual thing. You could actually design them. It wasn't just black text, gray background, blue links. And lots of parts of the university wanted to take advantage of that. And there was not a lot of expertise around to do it. So a lot of my first clients were parts of Penn, Wharton External Affairs, the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, Penn Dining Services, Penn Card. There are a bunch of others that I can't quite remember at the moment, but they were the Penn Health System. They were a lot of my early clients. I like to tell people, I'm proud to say, by the time all was said and done, I got more money out of Penn than they got out of me.
Well, I need to hear that story in like at least a 3-hour feature film, because again, that's like gold right there. But what was it like? Like, tell us the first example or the first story that comes to mind of you being a student, finding like, okay, this university's website sucks, or this department really needs some help here, or maybe like, making that pitch. What do you think was
it wasn't that it sucked. They didn't even exist. They didn't even exist. So it was talking to a friend, showing them what I had done for this one group, and them saying, oh, well, I'm working over in the engineering school office, and they've been talking about making a website. Maybe you should come talk to them. It's that community aspect, those introductions. And what I say to any of the students who have an idea or a startup or a concept, sometimes you're a little afraid to spill the beans about it. Sometimes you're a little reluctant to talk about it. You feel like it's not ready yet. You feel like it's not where it should be. And then you might keep it to yourself a little more than you should, but you never realize everyone you talk to there, they might be able to make an introduction that could turn things around for you. That could change things completely. You have to be comfortable talking about it, even if it's not ready for prime time. There's a saying, if you're not ashamed of your first product release, then you released too late. Then you waited too long, operating in a vacuum, trying to make things perfect, when what you should be doing is socializing it, getting feedback, and getting help.
That is something I think very important, and I see that even today in like some of the startups that we talk to, is that I feel like either there are some people like everyone's going to steal my idea, or there are just some people who generally, I think, especially creative people, who are very passionate about the work that they do, that they want to make sure it's absolutely perfect. And one of the things that I noticed is you're in a very creative industry, but at the same time with a very you kind of just balance the left brain, right brain 100% on this, in a sense. What were the things that you think enabled you, even when you were just starting out, to find that balance between the technical aspect and the kind of the what works aspect, as well as with the things that made it interesting and exciting?
Well, I'll say initially that balance, it's just the way I'm wired, and we all have our own talents. But we all have our gaps. So I'm wired for that. When I talk about that tendency to try to make it perfect before you get it out there, I'm speaking from experience. Like I fell prey to that earlier on. I also fell prey to some other challenges, things that I wasn't wired for. With the agency initially, I had it for 15 years before I sold it, but it had 2 lifetimes. The first lifetime, from when I started in 1995 up to, I'd say, 1999, it was growing fast. That was great. I got an office. I actually even hired a couple of people, but I wasn't good at
here first. Sorry, I just thought it was a nice visual. This is how it looked. This was the vibe. Sorry.
That was the first office. The first office was actually an apartment in Chestnut Hall, right off Penn's campus. The second apartment was over across the river in Center City at 17th and Arch. I had a couple of people working for me, but I wasn't delegating well enough. That was one of my gaps. Is I knew how to do it, but I didn't know how to delegate it out in a way that it could work. And so those people I was paying, they were, maybe half to 3/4 busy. And I almost burned out myself, like working 80-hour weeks. So that was, so I was good at balancing the left brain, right brain, but that was one of my gaps. When I say the agency had a second lifetime, after taking a break, I put the agency on the shelf for a couple of years. Did that other startup we talked about, and we can come back to that, with some people I'd met at Penn. When I brought the agency back out in around 2003, first thing I did was I went and I hired a creative director. And he's a great designer. And he and I, originally, he had been my design intern. So,
you got a real fast promotion there. Yeah.
By the time we were done, he was way ahead of me from design. At the point that I brought him back, I was still I might have been a little bit better than him. But the point was, I delegated that out to him. I said, all right, let's bring you in. You're going to focus on this. I'm going to focus on the other things. Then I got a director of technology, and he took over the technology and the programming things and the coding things. And I focused on the strategy and the sales. And we built it out that way. And I still wore a lot of hats, but as we grew, I kept taking off hats and putting them on other people. In a lot of cases, people who were better at that thing than I was. And that's how it was able to grow. And that's how we were able to succeed that second time around, by really learning from mistakes. And you said such wonderful, glowing things about me, and I appreciate them, and it's wonderful to hear. But I made a lot of mistakes along the way, and I try to learn from all of those. Even now with Glimmer, which really, and I know you mentioned a little briefly, but just to tell people, Glimmer is a knowledge consultancy. So we are focused on knowledge management for organizations and helping them capture and organize all of that and share all of that institutional knowledge that they come up with every day. So it's a very different kind of business. It's a different focus, still incorporates a lot of that thinking and that analytical process of breaking it down and saying, all right, for a company, what do they need to know? In what areas? What should they be considering? How should this be shared? Even early things from the agency days of information architecture comes into play there. But with that, I've tried to make a conscious effort to identify, what did I do wrong in that first successful business, so I don't make the same mistakes again. I know one of the other mistakes I made back then is when I figured out pricing, when I priced our services, I didn't build room into that for sales commissions. And then by the time it's needed to grow beyond me doing the selling, I didn't really have that room to offer commissions out to people. So now that's built into my pricing now, because that's just a part of doing business. The things we know, we don't know what we don't know. And when we're young, there's a whole lot that we don't know yet. So for a lot of this, I'll bring this back around, for a lot of those students who they've got entrepreneurial aspirations, they've got an entrepreneurial concept, there's something great about doing it when you're so young and fresh and right in or out of school. You've got the energy, you've got the enthusiasm. You're not locked into a fixed way of thinking. On the flip side, if you haven't spent the time in bigger organizations in that industry, you've got blind spots and you don't know what they are. I had blind spots from the agency perspective because I hadn't been in a bigger agency. And so there's a grass is always greener situation of, do I start something now because I'm excited and I'm passionate and I've got the energy, Do I start something now? Do I start entrepreneurial first? Or do I go get the corporate experience and then break out? And there is no right answer. It's different for everybody. But either way, recognizing the grass is always greener thing, either way, you want to broaden your perspective and realize that whichever path you choose, there's knowledge down that other path that would benefit you. So if you're not living it, doing it, at least find somebody else who is exploring that path and trade and trade knowledge and share knowledge and learn from what they're learning from, rather than trying to figure it all out yourself. And it is a lot easier now. A lot more of it's online now, but still those conversations are valuable.
And I think, just as you mentioned, the experience itself is very important. Like learning the theory of this is how an organization operates from the inside versus being an individual inside an organization and being your client for a little while probably is very different of how you kind of cognitively process that information. And of course, I want to talk about your second startup and what you do now and your agency time, like your time at AMC and so on in a second. But just following down this thread for a second, there are a couple of things that you brought up that were very, very interesting to me personally. Like one part of it is I noticed that in your entrepreneurial journey, and this doesn't happen to like all the startups out there, many of them fail very quickly. But like one of the things that that you had to experience is kind of the transition between, again, being a startup to being an actual organization where you have a team, you have multiple projects happening, you have a lot more going on than just three friends can do together, like over coffee in a sense. And a lot of people I think don't realize that is a cognitive jump. You have to start thinking differently again about, like as you said, building in the sales commission, building in all of these different elements that as a startup you may not have, but if you want to sustain and be an organization, you have to think about those things. And it's something that I personally have been struggling with, to be very honest, because the delegation and everything, I think it's very natural as a founder. Like I can do it best. I can do it. Like, I'm the person who knows this business. But it actually comes to a certain point where, you got to promote yourself and you've got to find the right people to fit in those other roles. So I'm very curious at, for everyone else who's going through that leap, I think that's where a lot of student entrepreneurs fail, if you ask me very frankly, in a sense, because they aren't able to get contextualized or do things differently. How did you make sure that you were beginning to change processes? You were beginning to, again, take in the honestly, just be real with yourself and say, hey, you know what? I'm no longer a startup. I'm an organization now. I have to think things differently, because that takes a certain emotional maturity that I don't think all of us have yet. I myself struggle with it. So like cards on the table. So how do you have that frank conversation with yourself?
So, sometimes I've expressed to people who are in conflict situations, or even my own kids, I've said, do you want to be right or do you want to win? And that concept of what is the outcome you're looking for here? And we sometimes mix up and conflate that. And I did it too. The outcome I was looking for, I was passionate about what we did. The outcome I was looking for was put out the best possible product. And that comes back around to that, it's got to be perfect when it goes out the door. We have to make sure we do all of this right. But the flip side of that was, we had priced out these projects. They were fixed price. If I was focusing on that, then I wasn't focusing on profitability for the business. So you can't have everything. There's that old saying, good, fast, cheap, pick two. And it's about those trade-offs. So you have to identify that you're not going to be able to have everything. It's number one. Number two, when you do start to look around to share the load with other people, there are also two sides to that. One side is finding people who are also interested and engaged and passionate about what you're passionate about, and giving them the story. Like, here's why I'm so excited about this thing. We have this great mission. We have this great opportunity. They have to buy into that. But even if they buy into that, unless they're significant equity partners in the business, you have to remember that they still have their own needs and their own motivations. Another friend of mine, another entrepreneur a long time ago, learning from his own mistakes, said, Jeff, they're your employees, they're not your friends. And that doesn't mean they can't be both, but that you've got to be able to separate that context and say, okay, just because this person is my friend, that doesn't mean they're going to sacrifice their own career journey and their own career growth. And if I'm not paying them up to their market value, just because they're my friend doesn't mean they're going to stick around. Like they're not necessarily going to care about all the same things I care about. So I have to be able to separate that out and say, okay, as I'm building this organization, I want people who are going to support what my true goal is. So I have to make sure that their motivation is there for them. I have to make sure that the experience for them is rewarding. I have to make sure that the compensation structure is set for it. I have to make sure that I'm setting reasonable expectations for them. Another thing people have said to me over the years is, oh, you work for yourself, that you have your own business. That must be great. You can make your own hours. And I would say, yeah, I can make my hours harder than I would ever let anybody else make them for me. So the recognition that these people you find and bring into your team are not necessarily going to work as hard as you are towards that success, nor should they. That's important too, and figuring that out. And then again, like I said, do you want to be right or do you want to win? The recognition that when you delegate, it won't necessarily get done the same way that you would do it or to the same level. You can work to train them, you can work to guide them, but you have to set realistic expectations there and be willing to say, okay, now if you hire people who are better than you at different specialties, might get done a lot better. But even if it gets done a lot better, it's still different than you would do it. And you have to be willing to identify what's really important about that and let the rest go to the people you delegated to decide. Is that helpful?
No, that's very solid. Very solid advice. And, like on both fronts, the delegation front, again, something that, again, I think I need a constant reminder on. So I appreciate that. And, just a conversation I was having with my friend who's also a founder going through something similar, of finding, people who are committed and passionate. Not all the time do you I think, the joke that we were talking about is, or not even a joke, just the reality is that the people you are employing or the people you're working with are not going to be able to, or wouldn't even want to put in the same hours and passion and motivation as the founder. And you can't expect them to, just because you, again, don't treat yourself to the normal 9 to 5 doesn't mean the people that you're employing would also have that similar mindset. And that is perfectly fine. In fact, that should be encouraged more. So I really love hearing that from your perspective. And I'm curious, how did these experiences carry on to your next startup as well? Because that was, again, during that intermission that you mentioned between the two halves of your hero's journey with Singularity.
The intermission, we started a company. This was with somebody I met at Wharton and somebody he knew, and some originally as the three of us. We started an organization, we started a company. We were pioneers in promotions and viral marketing. We were the first company that took viral marketing techniques, which had just emerged in the late 90s, at least in the digital sense. That it had been around forever, of Tupperware parties and things like that, but digitally driven viral marketing techniques. And we were the first company to apply that to sweepstakes. And that allowed us to rapidly grow this opt-in consumer database that we could send paid promotional messages to. In 6 months, we built up a database of 6.5 million members. We got them engaged with these sweepstakes and later with other kinds of games and things. We delivered paid advertisements to them. And then we sold the business 10 months after launch to one of our first paying customers, which was about.com. So that was super rapid. We got that up to about 20 people, I think, in those 6 months. in 2 offices down in Houston. And right from the start, there was definitely division of labor there. And then it was very fast. So you couldn't have that that hands-on everything feel, because it was evolving so quickly. And we just had to kind of go with that. And we had to recognize, all right, you're in charge of this. Great. Go do it. You're in charge of this. Go do it. Where are we right now? Keep things moving. So that was a crazy ride. Again, it emerged from relationships that I had established initially in college. It emerged from having socialized what I was doing and what expertise I had. It emerged from having the energy and the time to be able to really dive into it like that. And it was a wild and crazy ride. And after that, when I came back and guest lectured in my old entrepreneurial management class, which was a thrill. Talking about that, when I went and talked about that, obviously, I had started Singularity. We had started and sold Glowbug. We'd also tried a couple other things. Even Glowbug didn't start out as what it ended up as. It started out as a different business, also viral marketing driven, but around sharing, funny content, funny pictures, funny videos, sound files, things like that. And there were some aspects of that business. We launched that, and it quickly got up to 40,000 members. And we're like, okay, great. We need some capital. We went to look for the capital. And what we found after a lot of conversations was there were a couple of things about the business, the nature of some of the content that was being shared, the fact that we were offering a revenue share percentage to members that the SEC hadn't said anything about whether that kind of thing was allowed or not. They hadn't said it wasn't, but they hadn't said it was. So we're talking to investors and they're saying, we love what you're doing, but that scares me, so I can't invest. So we had to circle up, and it was around Thanksgiving, and we circled up and we said, it's working so well, but we can't get the money that we need for this. What do we do? And we had to figure out, okay, how do we take the things that are working from this, separate them from the things that are scaring off the investors? What can we do with that? And that's where we got to sweepstakes. We realized we can put this in a different context, forget that other stuff, make it about sweepstakes. And, you're not getting revenue share, you're getting more sweepstakes entries. We took that concept back to the potential investors, and they were like, all right, done, let's sign. Let's get that going. We had to do that pivot. And I don't even know if the term pivot had been coined yet. Now it's common. And most of the businesses I know now, most of them are not what they started as. Even Glimmer is not what it started as. You at the beginning, you read a little bit of the old description. It started focused on data insights and training. And that ended up not being the big opportunity. That ended up not being what the customer base actually needed. And in conversations and getting out there and socializing and meeting with people and working with the first few clients, we realized where the big gap was. And that was like, okay, this is it right here. Like, forget that other stuff. That stuff's great. I believe in it. It could work. But this is what they really need. And this is what they're willing to step up and sign for and pay for and have us do. And it's really going to benefit them. And going back around to the college entrepreneurs, you start out with an idea of what you think the market wants. And you start to build around that. But you won't know if you're right until you're out there pitching it and meeting with people and listening, not just talking, but listening to what are their needs. What are they actually concerned about? What is stopping them from saying yes? And that's why what you do see is you see a lot of startups coming from people who have gone into that industry, worked in a larger company, and in doing that, they've got a front row seat to the unmet needs. And then from that, they get their idea, and they're already a lot further along because they've lived in it. and they can come out and they say, I know there's a need here because I saw it and I heard people complaining about it. I saw the impact it had and I've got the numbers. And that's why you see a lot of startups come from that. And even those ones have to pivot and change. But if you marry yourself too much to your original idea, your original vision, that can end it right there. If you're not willing to listen and adapt and adjust.
So I'm going to first of all, take this opportunity to show, I think what may have been kind of the final iteration, or where is this in kind of, your iterations of the second startup?
Oh, that was probably the middle version.
Middle.
All right. Yep, that was the middle version. That was not the initial release. And then later on, we expanded out and we built some, little web browser-based games you could play to try to win more entries, puzzle games and things like that. But that was about the middle one, and it was remarkably effective. Nowadays it wouldn't do nearly what it did back then because, once we proved that could be done, now everybody does the same things. So that's, part of that speaks to timing. You could be too early with a concept. If you remember Apple's Newton, back in the day, Newton was ultimately a complete failure. But it was years early, and eventually they had the iPhone, and there we go. But you can be too early, and you can be too late. You can be so late that everybody's already doing it, and things that were effective when it was being done by one or two groups become ineffective when they're done by 100.
So thank you for discovering that it worked, and for setting the trend then anyway. But picking up on another conversation thread about having that experience and the value of kind of having an experience within a larger organization and how that informs entrepreneurial decision making and how that informs kind of an individual's career growth itself. I wanted to pivot a little bit to your experiences as well. I think here's actually you on your first day at Scripps. So you had like this whole network TV whole kind of component to your career, for lack of better words. So tell me a little bit about like what motivated you to again try this kind of different pivot, to use the word, in your life, and how was it like going from entrepreneur to someone who again works in a larger organization, which has a lot more moving parts and nuts and bolts?
So a couple of things. First off, that picture, that was so much fun. That was my first day at Scripps, and part of the orientation, I got to go into the Chopped studio.
Oh,
picture of myself opening one of the chopped baskets. That was a thrill. But aside from the fact that at that stage, I had sold the agency a couple of years earlier. I had been solo consulting, which it was great, but I kind of wanted to be back in a team environment. The other thing, very, very frankly, I realized I had 18 years of entrepreneurship behind me, none of that corporate experience. And I realized that, unfortunately, the corporate world, they look at that resume and they look for the names on it. And at a certain point, if you haven't gotten that experience, if you haven't gotten that pedigree there, those doors are closed. And one of the reasons I did it, I said, if I don't go in and get some of this experience now and kind of break in from the outside, then there won't be an opportunity to later. I'll always have the opportunity to come back to entrepreneurship. And lo and behold, 8-9 years later, I have, but I won't have that opportunity. And there's more to learn here. There are things I knew at that point. There's a lot I have not experienced. I do not know. I can be very happy about all my accomplishments so far, but there's a lot more. There's this whole other world I have not been in yet. So I need to go see what that's like. And I spent 8 years in 3 global media companies, Scripps Networks, which was then acquired by Discovery, and AMC Networks. In my time at Scripps and Discovery, and I know you've got a picture of this here, of me holding up my different business cards from that time period.
Yeah.
In my time at Scripps and Discovery, I had 5 different roles, evolving much more heavily into data and analytics and insights and data products. But as I mentioned to you separately earlier, Harsha, in that time period, there were at least 3 legitimate times where I could have been eliminated, where they could have eliminated my role. They cut a division I was in by half, and then they got rid of it completely. So that's 2 of those. And then Discovery acquired Scripps, and after a lot of uncertainty, they finally restructured everybody. And the reason I stayed there, the reason I was able to stay there and prosper through my time, was there were lots of times there that nobody was really saying, here's something really important and valuable for you to do. Here's what we want. Here's how we want you to focus. Here's what we want you to do. There were plenty of times where it was just people were busy with different priorities. There was uncertainty. My boss there, he reported to, I think, 5 different people in an 18-month period. So there was a lot of that uncertainty. But for me, and then for myself, my boss, our team, the priority was, all right, where am I going to create the most value? What can I do that is valuable here, that is going to be beneficial? Even if nobody asked me for it, where do I see that opportunity? Maybe that comes back to that entrepreneurial mindset, but I see a need here for something. Nobody is dealing with it. I'm going to go deal with that. And then I'm going to share, and then I'm going to socialize what I've done and show here is something something valuable. I actually won the Scripps Inventor Award for one of the platforms I built there, that I built because I needed better data to do the job that I was tasked with, and nobody had it. So I built something better, and then they loved it, and other people started using it, and it created new opportunities. And all of that rolled into that time when I said they eliminated the entire division. They kept 4 of us because of some of the things we'd been doing around data and analytics that nobody had asked for, but they saw that and they said, we need more of this in the company. We don't know where to put you yet, but we need more of this. So that's why they kept moving us around from group to group to group for a year or so. But the other thing I learned in having that experience, I learned a lot of things about the way the corporate world works. But I also learned that it wasn't as efficient and structured as I thought it was. 18 years I spent on the outside with these corporate clients. I always thought, oh, they've got all the resources, they've got all the money, they've got all the structure, they've got it all figured out. And then I got inside and I was like, oh my God, there's so much inefficiency here. There's so much, there's so much chaos here. And ultimately, that's what led to creating Glimmer and now focusing on knowledge management, is that recognition that, as buttoned up as it looks from the outside, inside, there's frustration and there's inefficiency and there's waste and there's risk. And there are ways to improve all of that. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. But I wouldn't be able to do this. I wouldn't even know that opportunity existed if I hadn't spent the time inside.
That is actually, a very kind of beautiful accumulation of all those experiences to get your role that you have now. I'm going to, just show this photo of you at the Wharton, I think, Analytics conference that you spoke at, I think, a little bit after you launched your latest startup. But just to kind of set the stage and tell us a little bit about, tell us about Glimmer. We've been alluding to it this whole episode. I'm sure people want to know now. And also a little bit about how the different experiences and lessons you had from, again, all the way from that first startup to your kind of recent corporate experience informs the opinion and informs the work you're doing now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So in a nutshell, if you think about an organization, every day, the people in that organization learn a tremendous amount. You learn about processes, you learn about products, you learn about customer relationships, vendor relationships, you learn about external market context, you learn about technology, you learn about problems you run into and how you solve them. A lot of that knowledge is lost and forgotten very quickly. By the end of today, you will forget 90% of the things you've learned today. And of what's left, a lot of it is hoarded, not intentionally, but it's just kept in somebody's mind, in somebody's notes, where it's not accessible to anybody else in the organization. They can't benefit from it. And eventually, whether it's 2 weeks down the line, 2 months, 2 years, 10 years down the line, when that person leaves the organization, that knowledge walks out the door with them. So what that leads to is inefficiency, drags on productivity, leads to frustration as people don't know, who do I talk to about, who do I ask about this, who do I ask about that? It leads to risk, compliance risk. I didn't even know that we had a policy on that, much less what it was. It leads to slower turnaround for sales efforts that cuts into sales. It leads to increased technology debt, and it leads to a lot of knowledge loss and a lot of anxiety. What if he leaves? Okay, if he leaves, do we know how to do what he's doing? So all these problems stem from the fact that this knowledge is leaking out of the organization or is isolated, not centralized. So Glimmer is all about knowledge management. It's about helping organizations to gather, capture, and organize that knowledge in a structured way that relates back to the way each business works, make it available through the right systems and the right structure to the people in the organization, and then change the culture, train them, and create a culture of knowledge sharing to drive those benefits that we talked about. And you asked, how does everything else I did relate to it? And it's kind of cool because it all does come together. Going back to the earliest days, back to the agency days, a big piece of what we did in the agency was about verbal communication, or communication through words, oftentimes written, but capturing and boiling down those important concepts into something that was concise enough for people to grasp, and then organizing it, putting the right information architecture around it based on the way those stakeholders and audience groups think and how to make sense of it. That plays right into the heart of doing knowledge management right. We talk about my time in corporate. I developed a lot of the techniques I'm using right now in that time in corporate, but understanding that the way they work and where those gaps are and where it doesn't work and what happens when there is a reduction in force, or somebody leaves for a new job, or somebody's out on vacation, all those situations. The data and analytics side, all that time spent in that, a lot of that, you spend large amounts of time digging into data to come up with an insight. And then what do? You put that insight into a PowerPoint deck, you share it at a meeting, maybe you drop it in an email. And what happens afterwards? It gets buried. The recognition that these important insights, these important pieces of information and knowledge, they're just buried. They're buried in a SharePoint site somewhere. They're buried in somebody's drive. They're buried in email. They're buried in Slack these days. That helped set the stage, again, from the technique standpoint, but also from the opportunity standpoint, to understand why this is so important and why this is so valuable. So it all kind of came together to get me where I am now.
No, I definitely see the immense value in this, just because I feel like this is something that we take for granted a lot of times, that, like, oh, we all know it. We were all in that meeting. Like, we all got the info. But as you said, like, often that information is not actually, being put to use. It's not actually shared. It's just, archived somewhere. It's put somewhere. And I feel like a lot of times, because we don't think about it and we don't think about how important it is, we build ineffective processes, we build ineffective ways of doing things and again, as you said, a lot of inefficiencies that we see in large companies can also start stemming up as startups grow and become organizations themselves, if we don't have that data sharing practices, if we don't have the kind of infrastructure for that.
And we can boil that down to just our individual lives. Our individual lives. I drink my own Kool-Aid here. I've got a knowledge base I'm building up for my family. And I decided, okay, great. I'm going to have this section on travel, and I'm just going to put in pages for all of the family trips we've taken. And I thought, okay, piece of cake. I should be able to make this list of the trips in 20 minutes. it took me a couple of days. I had to dig back through our photo albums to figure out what, and through emails and through flight bookings to figure out which ones I had forgotten. And these are like
fun stuff, yeah. Like let alone
they're not just fun. These are like, like life memories. These are important events. Like these are monumental things in our life. The fact that they could slip my mind, like that entire family vacation, like that was so like memorable, could slip my mind. It just shows you we're just not built to remember everything. And if we don't do that, so when we talk about, again, bringing it back around to part of this audience being aspiring entrepreneurs and people who are starting up the concept, realize first off, you won't remember everything that you know now, even if you think you will. Number two, you are hoarding. You are hoarding your knowledge. Even if you've got a team already, you are hoarding it. I talk to companies all the time, businesses all the time, much larger ones that still have a founder involved. And that founder is a wealth of knowledge that is not documented anywhere. Because they've lived it, they breathed it. I think back to myself in Singularity, that's probably one of the things that made it hard for me to delegate, is there was so much that I knew that nobody else knew that I wasn't finding any effective way to share. So this can affect us from the microcosm of our own life all the way out to being part of a global organization.
So I'm just going to put the website for, your organization here up a little bit, just because I think, if they want to know more, they should, and they should definitely, again, follow all of the other things that you're doing to get a little bit more insight on this. But I guess, my final question before we wind down for today is, at what point, and again, this has just been the common thread, at what point do we know we need to start building these knowledge bases? Because now I look back, year 8 in the startup, and I'm like, damn, I should have kept that record in year 2. I should have started writing it down way earlier than it is now, because I don't have the time to be sitting down and thinking about it today. But I did have it when I was doing it. So at what point do people need to start, making the conscious decision that they need to start doing things like this?
5 minutes ago.
Oh no.
For 2 reasons. Number one, the earlier you can start building good habits, the better. But you are already forgetting things. Have you ever had to run into a problem and said, okay, I know I Googled for this before. What did I type? What was my query? Which website was it that told me how to fix this thing on my computer? You had it before. You lost it, and now you've got to go do it again. I'm just using that as an example, but there are things. So right now, as I talk to all these people, one thing I'm really excited about is I'm gathering amazing stories and anecdotes about knowledge management, about what happens if you don't, some true horror stories, some amazing success stories, all these great stories, and they come up in conversations. I meet with people. As soon as I get off a call where somebody has shared one of these stories with me, I go and put it in my knowledge base, because otherwise I might lose it. And they're all so valuable. I've got a couple dozen of them stacked up there now, and they're just making life easier for me. They're making it easier for me to have conversations with new clients, making it easy for me to get my point across about why you need to do this now and what the impact could be if you don't. Eventually, they'll probably lead to a book. But I know that if I don't stop right now and capture this, there's a decent chance I will forget it. And that would be a shame. When I mentioned before that knowledge loss and lack of knowledge management leads to tech debt. If you've ever talked to anybody in a technology organization, talk to a CTO or a CIO, half the time they're not moving as fast along their roadmap as they want to, because they've got a lot of their resources dedicated to resolving tech debt, paying off the cost of these earlier old systems they're trying to replace and remove, replace and upgrade, and problems they're trying to fix. Most of that tech debt is avoidable. Okay, what that is that's 5 minutes of coding preceded by 2 days of figuring out what the right coding is. Like, what do I need to code? And that's just because at some point somebody made a decision when they were building that system, and they didn't document, they didn't write it down, they didn't share it. And a year or 2 years down the line, that person's gone or completely forgot why they did it or how they did it. And now something has to change, and everybody's got to go back in and reverse engineer it and try to sort it out. So taking that 5 minutes at the end of some big task just to say, what about this would be important? What about this would I need to remember in the future? And capturing it can save you hours or days down the line. And as an entrepreneur trying to get something off the ground, all those little things you're realizing, that could save the business.
That's a good point. Like, especially the coding one, that hits so well, because I know people who, like, they code something and then the next week they're like, oh wait, why did I do that? Why did that work? Why? So all of that hits beautifully. I do hope you write that book, and I do hope that's available soon enough for us to read and learn from. But until then, I guess this episode will have to do for our viewers out there who would love to learn more. But thank you so much for being here with us and sharing all of these experiences. I learned so much. Like, I was taking notes, so like I absolutely enjoyed. I'll start my own knowledge base of all these episodes soon enough. But I really appreciate all of those different experiences and all of the different things that you shared today. And I think it's so valuable to our students to have this wealth of knowledge that they can tap into. So thank you on our behalf as well.
Harsha, thank you for having me. This was a real pleasure. I'm so excited about this, and it was great to be able to share all this with you and your listeners.
All right. So I guess with that, our episode for today has come to a close. And to our audience, as always, this has been Changing Reality. We appreciate each and every single one of you. And thank you for joining us as well. I just hope that everyone in the audience had as much fun as I did listening in, which I'm sure you guys did. And hopefully we'll catch you again next week on Changing Reality once again. Till then.
You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio.